Hello, and once again, I want to explain to you the step-by-step to write a program on a tic-tac-toe game. Now, I have written this code, and what I'm going to do now is to explain what I have just written for you. Now, the first part of this task is to set up a tic-tac-toe game with a TK inter. Now, the first thing is that we have actually at the moment import what is called the TK inter to bring the module name into the namespace. And then we use the abbreviation, which is known as TK abbreviation, which is a common practice when when we tend to use the TK inter. So that's why we have the import that is a part of that inbuilt function. Now, then we import the font module directly to the TK inter. This is to tweak the font of the game that displayed. This is basically to tweak the game, to font of the game to be displayed. Then we create a class, as you can see here, which is to produce the GUI window for the game board. Next, the next thing is that we have a defined function here that is called the superclass method, which is properly used to initialize the parent class. And to do this, we use the inbuilt function called the super. And then we define the title, which is known as the tic-tac-toe game, as you can see from there. As you can see here, the tic-tac-toe game, we're using a data string, to for the title. That's why you have the speech mark as shown there. The last part of this, which is known as the cell, is an attribute that all the empty dictionary screen. So it's an attribute. So basically, this is like the dictionary will map the button and the cells on the game board to their corresponding rows and column on the grid. Now, the next two parameters I will come back and talk about then before it could be initiated. So by doing that, by initiating the row and the column, which is what we have here, the coordinates of the integer will reflect the role and the number where a given button will appear. Now, to continue with this game board, you will then have to create a display. We have to create a display where you can provide information about the game status and the result. And by doing that, we use a frame widget, which you have here. A frame widget will be displayed on the panel, as well as the label, which is also shown there. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start to explain to you certain things regarding this next stage here, which is creating a board display. So in the line, which is the display frame here, which is the line here, this basically we are creating a frame object to hold the game display. Note that there is a master argument that is set here to self, which means that the game main windows will be the frame parent. The next one, which is the next line here, the frame here, is using a pack geometry manager, which is to place the frame object on the Windows top main board. Yeah, I will explain that. And then by setting the argument which is field equal to tk.x, it ensures that the user can resize the windows, resize the window, as well as the frame will be filled with an entire width. So that's the purpose of that. Now the next line here, which is from there down to approximately here, we create a label object, and this label object needs to be live inside the frame object, and so that we can set the master argument, as you can see here, to the actual frame. Then the label, we initialize the text saying ready on top of the game, and then the player can then start a new match. Finally, we have the self.display packet, which also, the font here, which finally also talk about the size of the pixel, and which can make it bold for the ready, for the actual ready there. So determine the size of the text message down there. And the last part, which is for this particular creating a board game, is to do with displaying the label inside the frame. So we have just I've just been able to explain the first two lines that are just happening now. Now that we have created the grid for the cells, because we've just created the grid for the cells, what we need to do, we need to, normally for a classic Tic Tac Toe game, there are three, for tactic, there should be around three by three grid of cells. And what I'm going to do now is the next line of board, which is creating a board grid, where we explain, where I explain how the grid of the cell is using a button object. So in that case, what's going to happen, I'm going to try to explain what is going on this particular line of programming here. So I believe, which is the line, so the line here, which is the, I believe, yeah, this line here is also similar to what which I've just explained at above here. So we are creating a frame object to hold the game grid of the cells, and then we set an argument master to self, and which again means that the main game window will be parent of the frame object. Now, the next line here, which is the package geometry magia, is basically place the frame object on the window, and this frame will occupy the area under the game display, and all the way to the bottom of the screen. So basically what that the geometry pack is actually doing is actually placing an object on the window where the entire frame is being occupied under the display game, and all the way to the bottom of the game. Now the next line here, we have a for loop, with a for loop, where when we talk about for loop, it's basically iterating, it's like a counting loop. So that is to say, between that line, basically what is happening is that there are numbers that is represented in rows and coordinates for each of the cells in the grid. For now, as I said before, we're only going for 3 rows and 3 columns in terms of what we are trying to create. So we are just only going to create a tic-tac-toe game where we have this, the board game. We're not starting writing the program. We're only trying to set up a tic-tac-toe game using the TK Inter. That's what we're trying to do now. So we're only trying to set it. We're not going to start to play it. This is just the first stage of it at the moment. Now the next line, which is this line here, is basically, this tool line is basically trying to configure both the width as well as the minimum size of every cells within the grid. So remember, it depends on how you want to make the square, the row and the column, how big you want it to make it. So that's times the weight and the minimum size, the row and things like that. That's what we're doing there. So the next line again here is talking also again a loop again, which is a loop over the column. The first one here is for the row. The next one here is for the column, as you can see there. And again, we're going to have 3 columns as usual, 3 by 3 columns as well too. And then I believe from here now to here, what is happening down here is we are creating a button for an object for every cells on the grid, because it's going to look like a square, like a grid. And then we set all the attribute, including, as you can see, the attribute, the master, the text, the font, and so on. The background and width, everything is being set based on the type of the grid that we're creating, as you can see there. Now, the last part here is talking about cells, and is to add, basically this line of programming here is talking about adding every new button to the cell dictionary. Now, cell dictionary, we have, when we talk about data structure, we have the dictionary, we have the loop. So we have the dictionary, we have the list, we have the tuple. But in this case here, we are using is similar to this is the button that we have created here is to the cell as shown here, to the shell, which is row and column. These are, we're having a key and a value where we have the row and the column. And below that there, as you can see here, we have different keys and value that has been assigned, as you can see shown on this geometry, which is using the grid as shown down there. So these are quite very, very important. Now that we have been able to implement, we have now been able to implement the board grid as well as the board display. What we need to do, we need to make sure that we need to call this function from the class. And remember, I said I will come back to this again. So what we need to do is that we need to add this two line to this particular class here. So by doing that, that will, and by the time we run the program, we'll be able to call it successfully, because even after we have created the board game as well as the board grid, this we need to initiate the call on the class, because remember, this is a class. I will talk about classes and objects in the class to you, but for now I just want you to have an idea about this is how to start creating a tic-tac-toe game. Now, let me tell you, this method, there are several methods of doing it, but for the purpose of this class, I believe this is a simpler way, in my own opinion. But if you have a better way of writing it, fine by me. But this is just a better way of just trying to explain what is going on here. So now that we've added that line, explain what is going on that second line, that line for you now. So the two lines will be put together on the board. So this will be put together by adding the display and the grid to call the cell. Now, what we can do now is to ensure that we are able to run the game successfully through by initiating the game. And that's why we have the main function that is showing there at the bottom here. So here at this time, we are creating the game board and to run it on a main loop. Remember, it's very important that we are able to initiate the time to run that program successfully. And to do that, we have to define a main. We have to define a main function as shown here for the game. Inside this function, we have to instantiate what is called a tic-tac board game, and then run it on the main loop call function, which is what we have the main loop call function, which you can see here. By doing that, we then have a construct there, which is shown here, that is a part which is pattern normally used in Python, and it basically allow us to control the execution of the code in order for this to be able to run as the main function will only happen when we run it on a .py file. So that's just a brief explanation about the code. I would advise you to write this code, to play around with it. Just follow the step by step. I will also add the file code onto the classroom for you to have a look at. So if I press my F5 now, if I press my F5 now on this code now, so if I press F5 and I run this code now, and you see the grid is now ready, as I said. So 3, 1, 2, 3 column. So 3 column, 1, 2, 3, and 3 rows, which is just being created. So now, at this moment, what you are seeing now is not a perfect game, but it's just to set up a game, to set up the grid and the board of a tic-tac game. So thank you, and I'm going to see you next time.